The incessant throb of the Electra's engine batters at my tired brain. I've been flying 20 hours, and I'm exhausted and worried. We haven't been able to get a position on the Itasca, the ship that's supposed to guide us on where to land. With a worrying sound, the pulley system dangles another navigation note in the cockpit. There's no time to read Tom's message. I twist in my seat and look back towards the cabin. He probably can't hear me, but I yell anyway. Not now, Tom. At this point, he's no help. We should be right on top of the Itasca. I just know it. I scan the horizon, hoping, praying to see the ship. But there's nothing. Just sun glinting off the deep blue-green ocean. I turn the knob to change the wavelength before speaking into the microphone for the transmitter again. My voice is thready with anxiety, and I have to force myself to speak up. KHAQQ to Itasca. We are on line 157337. We will repeat this message. We will repeat this on 62-10 kilocycles. We are running a north and south line. Only answer I receive in return is static. I haven't been able to establish voice contact all morning. I'm tuning the 62-10 when an alarm on the instrument panel rings. It's a warning. We're low on fuel. I tap the fuel gauge. The needle bounces around before settling near E. My grip on the steering column tightens. We're running out of time. We only have minutes before the engine cuts out and the plane goes down. I am on a flight around the world that has run into trouble. I am Amelia Earhart. Let me tell you about the moment I fell in love. Well, actually, the story begins long before that. In 1918, I spent long, tiring months working as a VAD, Voluntary Aid Detachment nurse, at the Spadina Military Hospital in Toronto. Some of my patients used to talk about flying. When they recovered, I visited them at the airfield and marveled at the planes taking off, wondering what flying would be like. But of course, as a civilian, I couldn't go on a flight. Sometime after the war ended and I joined my parents in Los Angeles, I asked Father about flying lessons, and he arranged for me to take a flight, thinking that I wasn't really interested in lessons, but just curious about flying. Father took me to Rogers Field on Wilshire Boulevard. My flight was quite dear, $1 a minute for 10 minutes. I had to wear a helmet and goggles. I remember a strange tingle of excitement skittering down my spine as the plane engine roared to life, and we taxied down a dirt strip and lifted up into the air. My heart pounded so hard within me as the world dropped away. I could see so far. The tiny automobile whizzing down the street, the taller buildings of downtown with citrus groves to the east. Then we flew west, and there were a few big houses in the verdant hills of Santa Monica. Then we were over a sandy beach with waves of the Pacific curling in. The flight was over much too soon. My legs were weak. I had to be helped down from the cockpit. Father asked me how it was. I was tongue-tied, the blood racing through my veins. He patted me on the back, reading his answer in my shining eyes. For a long time afterward, I couldn't speak. I could hardly breathe. All I wanted was to be up there again. I fell in love with flying, and my life would never be the same. SOS. KHAQQ to Itasca. SOS. I don't know what to do, so I keep calling the ship. Suddenly, I see it. Just ahead. It's not the ship. Just a tiny scrap of an island with a huge lagoon and trees. But there's a strip of narrow beach where it just might be possible to land a plane. I've no choice in the matter. I steer towards it. The engine is coughing. There's a high-pitched whine. The plane shudders. Tom tries to crawl over the fuel tanks into the cabin to join me in the cockpit. I yell at him to stay put. I have a tight grip on the throttle. The engine gives a final sputter and then goes bone chillingly silent. All we can hear are tiny groans from the metal and the rush of air over the wings. I lower the flaps and maneuver the controls best as I can, praying that we glide. We're dropping! I yank the lever for the landing gear, and then we're over the island. The beach rushes up to meet us and we jolt down hard. The plane skids across the shore and into the water, smashing up against some coral. My head snaps forward and hits the Bendix receiver over my seat. Watch out! I move out of the way just in time as two workmen pass carrying propeller parts. One of them loudly remarks to the other about how gals have no business being around airplanes. My cheeks get hot. Hello, Lily. It's Anita, jogging over to me and rolling her eyes. One of the few female pilots at the field, she's used to incidents like this happening. Ready for your lesson, she asks me. I nod. The lessons are expensive. I've worked many long hours to pay for them as a truck driver, telephone operator, tutor. I'll do just about any job anyone will hire me for. It's tiring, but I'm learning to fly. My face is hot. I drag my eyes open, squinting against the bright sunlight slanting in through the cockpit window. I push myself off the instrument panel. The plane's tilted forward at an awkward angle. My head aches. I'm frightened of what I might find as I feel my face with my hands. There's a big goose egg dead center in my forehead, but thankfully no blood. The rest of my body hurts too, especially my left arm, which I think got slammed into the door during landing. It comes back to me slowly. The last leg of our trip around the world, not being able to find the boat, running out of fuel, and the crash landing on the island. I flip on the radio. It seems to be working. I send a message. SOS. KHAQQ to Itasca. SOS. I wait for a moment, but there's nothing but static. I switch it off. I suddenly realize that except for the waves crashing, it's silent. I twist around to look into the cabin. Tom? Tom! There's no answer. Oh God, is Tom hurt? I carefully climb out of my seat and crawl over the fuel tanks into the cabin. The tight space is even harder to get around than usual, since I'm crawling upwards due to the tilt of the plane. I finally reach Tom, but he's slumped over. A large gash on the back of his head bleeds heavily. I have to slither over the fuel tanks all the way back to the cockpit to reach the emergency kit. I try again to make a quick call for help. SOS. KHAQQ to Itasca. SOS. I'm crawling back towards Tom when a large wave crashes into the plane and rocks it. The tide is coming in. The bouquet of roses they give me to hold during the ticker tape parade is enormous. After a while, it makes my arm ache, but I won't put it down. I love the attention for women in aviation all this publicity is bringing. But it feels a little hollow. I was just crew on the flight across the Atlantic. Baggage, like a sack of potatoes. Stultz did all the flying. But I smile and wave to the crowd anyway. One of these days, I'm going to redo that flight. I'm going to be the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. I flopped onto the sand. Every part of my body aches. I didn't know how much of the plane the tide was going to cover, so I rushed. I bandaged Tom's head, and then I climbed to the rear cabin bulkhead. The stowage door was jammed, but I was finally able to force it open and got the life raft out. I inflated it using a CO2 canister and pushed it out of the cabin door. I still don't know how I managed to drag Tom onto the raft, but I did. After I got us to shore, I made a little shelter from the raft. propping it up with the emergency food box and putting Tom under it so he'd have some protection from the sun. Tom? Can you hear me? Tom? Still no response. I trickled a little water from my canteen down his throat. I paddled back out to the plane twice more to gather anything else I thought might help us. It looks like the tide isn't going to rise much higher, which is good. It only came about halfway up the plane, so much of the cockpit is still dry. But there's no way we could fly out of here, even if we had fuel. The plane's perched precariously on a coral outcropping, and it could slide deeper into the ocean at any minute. Suddenly, I hear it. An engine. There's a plane flying over the island. I can hardly believe it. It's finally ready. With all the modifications to make my plane suitable for long flights, Lockheed ran over a month behind schedule with the build. I run my fingertips over the smooth, shiny metal of the Electra's nose. If you looked at another man the way you look at airplanes, GP mock growls. He hugs me from behind and kisses the side of my neck. Then he steps back and waves a hand at the photographer. We're at the hangar in Burbank, seeing for the first time the plane built for my flight around the world. GP being GP never misses an opportunity to capitalize on a moment. So a photographer is here taking some publicity shots while I explore the new plane. I open the cabin door. Instead of the usual seating for 10, there are huge fuel tanks. My plane can hold 1,150 gallons of fuel, enough for more than 20 hours of flight time at normal cruising altitude. The only empty space is a little cramped corner of the cabin where the navigator will sit. No way I'll be able to hear them over the engine. We'll have to figure out a way to pass notes and communicate. I look in the cockpit. So many gauges, knobs, and buttons. The Electra's far more technologically advanced and complex than my little Vega. Elmer, the Lockheed pilot, joins me. Ready to take her up? I take a deep breath and nod. I've never backed down from a challenge, and I'm not about to start now. I shouted and waved my arms. The plane was high, but they might still have seen me, or caught a glimpse of sunlight reflecting off of the wreckage. Surely someone had heard my distress calls and was now out here looking for us. Surely. But there was no dip of the plane's wings to indicate that they knew we were down here. No low flyover of the island. They hadn't seen us. And soon, we were gone over the horizon. I collapsed next to Tom, disheartened, and I eventually napped. I woke up late in the afternoon, thirsty, head still pounding. I had a drink from the canteen and some raisins. Thankfully, we have enough food for a few days. However, fresh water will be a problem soon. Tomorrow I'll go exploring in hope of sustaining our supply. I spent the rest of the afternoon and into the evening organizing our supplies and gathering driftwood. Using a blanket, I dragged Tom further up the beach and made a little camp. He's not any better. He won't wake up. He mutters feverishly in his sleep, thinking I'm his mom or perhaps his wife. The night isn't too cool on this tiny island in the Pacific, but I make a big bonfire anyway, more in the hopes that someone will see it than for warmth. I feel a little better after I wash my face with a little of my precious fresh water and change out of my soggy, sandy clothes. Earlier, during one of my trips to the plane, I rescued my half-empty bottle of Benedictine. I sip it slowly. I need my wits about me. I don't want to get drunk. But if there's any day that I ever needed a drink, it's been today. I lay in the dark next to the fire, thinking about my favorite things to relax myself. The way the corners of GP's eyes crinkle when he smiles. The sweetest little letter I got from a 9-year-old girl, telling me that she was going to grow up and become a pilot, just like me. Mother's deviled eggs. Chatting over coffee and chocolate cake with the ladies from the 99. The snap and pop of the fire is soothing. There are so many stars overhead. I could almost imagine that I'm camping if it weren't for my sunburn, all my aches and pains, and the nagging fear in the back of my brain that I'm trying to ignore. Tomorrow, when the tide is low, I'll go out to the plane and try calling on the radio again. Hopefully it will still work. But no matter if it doesn't, someone will come find us. They have to. I'm one of the most famous women in the world. The whole world is watching this voyage. They wouldn't just let me disappear. After all, I am Amelia Earhart.